Thank you, Matt. You wanna? Yeah, that's the real one. I don't know. Oh, that's the meat echo. Okay. All right. Can we, Andre. Okay. Can I get the people who are talking by the mic move? Move away from the mic, out of the room, whatever. Come on. We're trying to get started for the ACME meeting now. Can I have a volunteer to be the Jabber scribe? There'll probably be not much activity on that. Great, thank you, Sean. And can we have someone take minutes? All you have to do is record decisions, consensus, initial consensus. There'll probably be about 4 or 5 hums today. Anybody? Okay, thank you, Matt. Okay, old friends. All right, the blue sheets are going around. Let's see how well. Here is the note. Well, it's still early enough in the week that you're not sick and tired of it. I split it up into 2 pages. There's the resources. If you're new to the IETF, go click on those links. All right. The agenda. The document statuses, that includes the main document, CAA, and I forget what the other one was. At the SEC dispatch, star came up, and the dispatched it back to ACME. So we'll have a brief overview of that. There are some concerns and issues about interop for the CAA challenge. We'll discuss that a little bit. And then there's ACME Authority tokens, 2 presentations, one from Chris and John. Any other changes? Open mic, that's not going to happen. Okay. So the quick document status, I will, if I did this right, yes, there we go. Yes.
Okay, so Ecker provided his AD review in mid-May, which I replied to in detail and promptly forgot for a couple months. So there was radio silence. On World Emoji Day, you fail me.
The best I thought was trash fire, but okay, so that's a boom
radio silence.
It's a boom box. Nobody knows what those are anymore. You're old.
All right, I'll post the Google Slides link to the chat room later, so you can see the real full color version there.
Okay.
But today, CPU and I got together. We worked through the minor disagreements we had and got it merged. The one thing that had any significance there is I'll say the one breaking change there was a typo where the key rollover object had new key as the inner thing. So you had the old key signing over the new key in the account URL, and the new key signing over the new key in the account URL. So you didn't have the symmetry that you want in a rollover handover. So we had to fix that and change it back to the old key in the inner thing. You can see that in the diff and the PR. It should be an easy thing. It is breaking on any existing implementations, but it's an easy thing to fix. The question that didn't get resolved in this thread that we had back then was whether we should have mandatory to implement algorithms. And in particular, we're talking about the algorithms that get used for signing ACME request bodies by clients and verifying them by servers, and correspondingly what algorithms you can have account keys for. Ecker proposed on the list that we should have ECDSA with SHA-256 and P256 as a must, as a required, that has to be in your software. And ED25519 is a should. Note that this doesn't mean as a server that you have to accept these algorithms. It just means that if you're a developer developing the software to do ACME for a server, you have to implement those so that if someone wants to use those algorithms, they're there in the code. So
now just to clarify, this is for signing the ACME messages, not the actual certificates.
That's correct. That's the, yes. So this is focused on ACME, not on the PKI that is being managed by ACME.
Right.
So if you go to the next slide, I've got some proposed text. There's also a PR on the GitHub.
I don't have the next slide.
You need to update. So if you go to the repo, there's a PR. Yeah, don't bother with it right now. Those of you playing along at home, there's a PR, which I also sent a link to the list, to the PR there, that says basically this, that an ACME server implementation must implement ES256 and should implement EDDSA with ED25519. It's one sentence. It goes in the paragraph where we put constraints on JWS that we use in here. So it's a very simple change, but it doesn't entail a concrete requirement on server implementers. So I think I'm okay with this. CPU is nodding. So I think the author team is okay with this, but wanted to put this out here for anyone in the room to object. Anyone really hate those NIST algorithms, think we shouldn't be requiring them everywhere.
So before we, okay.
These are, by the way, also required signing algorithms for TLS. So they're going to be in your crypto stack.
Hi, Sean Turner. That was going to be my point. Like, they're in your TLS stack. They're there. Just use them. And when we don't like them later, you can just change them.
Yeah. So, Tim, any thoughts? Other CAs in the room? Thumbs up from Tim.
Tobias TO Delft. So what I'm always concerned with, if you put in algorithms by name, is that they age. And I mean, we have SHA-1 and DNSSEC, and every DNSSEC implementation has to have SHA-1. Question is if we would be going the same route then.
Yeah, that's always the risk with these. The trade-off is getting interoperability, ensuring there's common algorithms between implementations versus the risk that you've got to go fix it later. And I think the assumption is that these algorithms are long enough lived. We expect them to last for a while longer. And so when things fail, we'll come back and revise and change out the recommended algorithms.
Hi, Sean Turner again. Obviously, this is like the kind of like health warning you should give to all implementers. Don't hard code this shit. Like, obviously, you want to have updatable code, right? That's going to allow you to put new things in later, because we're going to need it, because these algorithms will go to hell in a handbasket at some point.
So, okay. I think first we should decide, we've gone from the beginning with not having any MTI signature stuff. So I first want to know what the working group feeling is about that. So have a hum. Are you in favor of MTI? Are you not, are you opposed to having MTI signing? Or do you not have enough information to decide? So all those in favor of specifying an MTI signing algorithm? Okay. All those opposed? All those who aren't sure? All right, so that was pretty clear consensus. We'll confirm it on the list. Does anyone want to say anything particularly new or novel about which algorithms we pick? Let's take that as a...
In favor of MTI?
In favor, okay. So we'll confirm that on the list, and we'll just confirm, we'll ask similar consensus for the signing algorithms, and then you can just make the pull request. Since that was the only open issue in the last call, in the AD review, is that correct?
Yeah, that was the only remaining open issue.
Yeah.
And there was just a hum in favor.
Yeah, it's all set. Okay.
So I mean, I've got the pull request queued up. I mean, I would be tempted to say, let's just go ahead and merge the pull request, given the strong agreement in the room, and we can back it out if there's a dissent on the list, just in the interest of kind of keeping up the tempo that we've got, given the radio silence over the past few months.
I think that's an excellent idea. Yeah, git revert. I know it works. And so we'll confirm on the list and call for, objections by the end of next week so that it doesn't drag on. Okay, thank you.
I was going to ask, do you wish me to start scheduling the IETF last call?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. They don't do it till after the meeting, but I'll, if you send me a new draft, I'll make sure we didn't miss anything.
I mean, so if he's going to do a 1 week,
I'm going to do a 1 week confirmation. Do you think we can be shorter than that? It was basically unanimous here to do the MTI like you suggested.
But I hate to be like, since it was my suggestion, I feel a little awkward about that. But I think, I think people can certainly complain on the IETF list if they don't like it. So
Yeah,
I mean,
okay.
it's going to be like Monday anyway. So
Yeah.
I think you just run them concurrently.
Fine. Okay, we shall do that. Thank you.
So Echo, did you mean like we hummed it in the room, we'll go ahead and land it based on that and handle the consensus in the last call?
That was my suggestion, but you're a former AD. What do you think of that?
I mean, I'm game for that.
Yeah,
Sherry, you're the
this
conservative
is addressing feedback from the AD. If people have concerns, they can bring it up at the IETF wide review.
Okay. What I'll do is I'll reply to myself in the list thread and say, we're going ahead and merging this. Please, if you object, please speak up soon, and there'll be a last call shortly.
You can send me and some new draft. I'll make sure we're good.
I'll have it done in 5 minutes.
Okay, thanks everyone. Thanks, Richard. Major milestone. We got the document done. I'm an up. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Next item is the CAA challenge. If you've looked at the mailing list in the past couple of days, or yesterday and today, the issues are that the CA browser forum mandates RFC, whatever it is, 6884, that specifies how to put CA records in DNS. And one of the things you put in there is, which CAs are allowed to sign for your items. The examples and the document text don't match. There's a BIS document going on that also doesn't match. Is there parameters? Are there zero space parameters, space versus tab? I don't know of any good solution here. We could try to file an errata against 6884, but there's already a BIS document under works. Sean, you look like you're going to say something.
So Tim Hollowbeek, the purpose of the errata is because the BIS is probably going to take a while to come out. An errata would be basically for the purpose of having something to point to that says NIST, IETF has acknowledged this is an issue. This is their preferred solution. This is what we're going to do in the short term. This is a good time to figure out what we want to do here because parameters essentially are unused in the wild at the moment. So there's relative freedom to pick what we want now. If we wait, ACME wants to use this now. If we wait, we're going to have problems with, people are already doing it this other way. So right. I don't have a strong preference for what the decision is, just that we make a decision and then I'm actually very active in the CA browser forum and I can point to it and say.
Right. What was your affiliation again there?
DigiCert.
Yes, thank you. Anyone else have an offering?
Hi, Sean Turner again. So we just kind of have this process where we point to a document, it's got an errata, and when it gets updated, the old one goes away and the new one just kind of gets specified. Like we kind of have this. So I think you guys have the ability to point to the errata if that's the way you want to go. What it sounds like you don't want to do is like be pinned waiting for this other document to get to the process. So if that's the concern, put big warnings around it and, you can point to the thing and put the errata in there and
so is there anyone actually, we had a errata in preparation and then it got evolved into a BIS effort. Want to write an errata, Tim? Or should we ask?
Just to be clear, like we have errata that basically like replaces entire sections of the documents. It's multi-pages, right? The encrypt and MAC thing was like probably the most recent one I think that we did. So there is history for this. So, and if you're going to mark it where it's either technical or hold for document update, like it's coming, so it's fairly well signaled.
Yeah, Tim Hollowbeek. I happen to be the lab's co-chair at the moment, so that makes things very easy. If people just tell me what they want the errata to say, I'm happy to sort of manage getting it, wandered through. So the question is, the biggest one is, it appears to me, I haven't gone back and looked at the history, but it appears to me what happened was that the ABNF and the examples, there was a change between a separator being spaces and I think something else.
Right.
And one of them got updated and the other one didn't, and the document went out the door.
Right.
It's the only real question is, what do you want the syntax? What does the, what's the consensus for what the syntax should be, the examples or the ABNF?
Right. So I'll suggest that what the working group would prefer to see is what's in our CAA usage doc. So maybe we can work with Larry and get.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the ACME proposal may be the only live usage that I'm aware of at this point.
Okay.
So if we just change everything that says ACME is right, I'm fine with that.
Okay. Anybody want to get their name and lights? Submit an errata? Okay, I will take the action to talk to Larry offline, and if he doesn't do it, I'll do it. Okay, so that means that then the CAA, which is already in last call, will move forward. ALPN and IP validation. I don't think, well, he's on the call?
Yeah, it's in the
Too many screens. Did it work? No. Okay, I don't know how to, sorry. Oh, there we go. Go ahead, Roland.
Oh, yeah, nothing has changed massively in the document since the last meeting, except for the removal of the reverse DNS zone validation method in the ACME IP document. Otherwise, we currently have deployed implementations of at least TLS LPN. Nothing for ACME IP.
And I had to miss the meeting, but in London we had agreed to move this to last call, correct?
I don't think so.
Okay. Let's. Anyone have any concerns, issues questions they want to raise about these? All right. So will move them to last call? No, I'm not sure. All those in favor of moving these documents to last call, please hum now. Okay, thank you. All those opposed? All those who need more information? Great. All right. Note that we'll move them, confirm on the list, and then we'll do a 2-week last call and then look for a document shepherd. I'll talk to the email documents. This meeting conflicted with CFRG, so Alexi's over there. The first one, certs for S-MIME. There's a challenge. He's got some discussion, co-author. They're working on it. They'll come back. I don't know that we'll meet in Bangkok. Well, actually, because of STIR, we probably will. So that'll be coming up. On the ACME email TLS one, the other ACME email sorry, doc. He says it's ready for last call, but there are 2 issues, and this is for servers, servers doing TLS, your POP server, your SMTP server, your DNS server doing DNS over TLS dot, right? Also, local mail transport is an option, although that would need some more work to get a port assigned and so on. Do people have comments about whether this is ready, or should we get these other issues fleshed out first?
Corey Bonnell, TrustWave. So I took a read of the draft earlier today. One thing that jumped out at me is the port and the service header parameters are actually in the protected JWS payload, or not in the payload. They're in the protected header. They're not in the payload, which I think is basically goes against the way how the base ACME spec encodes the request.
Okay. Just a quick show of hands. How many other people have read this document? Either one? Okay, Tim. Not many. Okay. I'd like volunteers, because I don't think they're not. The second one isn't ready for last call, it seems to me. How many people promise soon to read the email server document? It's pretty short. It describes how to get certs for your other service. Tim.
Yeah, it actually got discussed at the email table at the hackathon because the email happened to come across at that time. Tim Halbeek did just keep forgetting. It looks like it's in pretty good shape. We discussed the issues that were mentioned there. I forget who is sitting there, but the general view was that LMTP support was not really necessary, but that perhaps the issue for multiple services on the same host needs a closer look just to make sure that it doesn't have any of the issues that we ran into with TLS SNI, for example.
Okay. All right. So we won't advance these yet. Wait till the issues are resolved and expect at least one more draft. Since the main document is done, you all have lots of free time. So I encourage everyone in the working group to read these other documents. I mean, this is sort of the really cool thing about ACME, right? Is it's not just web PKI certs, it's all these other certs. And if we had, a way to get mail servers and mail user agents getting certificates really easily in an automated way, next stop, SMIME in the world.
Yeah, so not that I would volunteer to read a document, but is the server document, you're talking about the SMIME 02 there?
Yeah.
So I think I just looked at it. I mean, it's like 4 pages, right? And there's still a lot of like TBD in it, including the entire security considerations, including, and there's a lot of stub in it still. I mean, I'd be happy probably to review something that is short, but I feel like that's maybe not ready for.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Next item is STAR and its use of ACME. By way of history, right? They come here, then we had sec dispatch created, and
we are back.
And now they're bounced back, this time for real. So
exactly. So yesterday, I don't know if I guess that I see a few familiar faces. So some of you were there at the sec dispatch. Can you move on?
To the real slide?
Yeah. So basically, just to tell you the story again, we came with this proposal about having a mechanisms for using ACME to generate short-term certificates for delegate identities. So the idea is that, I guess that this is something that is quite familiar. Now there is a draft that is ACME STAR. That, by the way, and it's our fault, if we didn't send you an update, we believe it's mature for last call, just as a note.
Yep.
And this is something that, I know that should be in the other part of the agenda, but it's something that we were with all this sec dispatch stuff, and we were much more focused on that and forgot. I must confess I forgot completely to send you the update. So we believe it is for last call, yes, for if anyone is taking notes for the minutes. That's the other part. Let's say how you use ACME to generate these temporary delegated certificates. Then is how the entity that is asking for these certificates requests to start the ACME process to the owner of the identity. So basically, let me say this is a CDN that is asking a content provider to provide a certificate, a temporary certificate that can be used by the CDN nodes to prove that they are using a correct delegated identity that has been delegated precisely by the identity owner. So originally, we in a certain moment we split the process. On the one hand, the pure ACME process, and the other case is how you request to start this delegation. We were told to go to sec dispatch. Yesterday we were presenting the idea there. Sec dispatch believes that this belongs here, and it was interesting that some suggestions were made there. We went with the draft that details basic REST set of REST interactions to send the request and receive back the URL with the certificate generated by ACME. And during the discussion, some people were reflecting, and this is something I must say that I found interesting, and I basically agreed with the idea that for these requests we could use ACME as well. I mean, it would be a profiled ACME because, for example, validation is not to be made there because you don't need any validation. The validation is made on the other leg of the protocol, but at least that we could use basically an ACME request as well. So, since we have been bounced back by SEC dispatch, the questions are two, and first is whether the group believes that the problem, not the solution, the problem is something that is, as SEC dispatch thinks, something that has to be sorted out here and that we have to embrace inside ACME and look for a solution for this. This is the first thing we are asking. The second thing is precisely related with this idea that appeared during the SEC dispatch group, is whether these requests should be implemented as they are right now in the document. That is draft Sheffer is not ACME any longer, right? Is ACME. Yeah. Sorry? It still is. Okay, so it's the draft Sheffer ACME start request. Whether we should proceed with what we have right now, that is this REST protocol, or we should explore the idea of profiling ACME and thinking on a simplified, different interaction as another kind of ACME request. And that's it. Here is where we stand, right here, right now.
So, Eric, I have a question. Are SEC dispatches binding? So we can hit it.
Binding. You know is pretty no-ish, but
Yeah.
Can we be?
Yeah,
I was going to say, can we throw it back over the wall? I don't. Not that I want
So
to.
what I heard yesterday was the following observation, which was that you could just make this an ACME B2B UA, in which case this would be something which we appropriate document here. If nobody here is interested in documenting it, then I think you kind of have like a no. Or you can ask for a BOF, but I don't think you're going to get very far. So I think they're binding in the sense that you can't really come back to SEC dispatch again, but they're not binding in the sense that ACME has to take it.
I mean, yeah. So I think there's a potentially interesting problem here, but it's a little bit hard to, there's a pretty significant refactoring we talked about at SEC dispatch. So I'd kind of like to see the thing in a new form before I make a go, no go decision here. In terms of what that problem is, I think you might benefit from conceptualizing it a little bit more broadly. Or thinking back to early in some of these ACME discussions, people were asking about kind of how would something like an RA, I don't even remember what RA stands for. Registration Authority. Thank you. Yeah, these things that we've had in traditional. Yeah, really. Right. People looking for something like how a kind of intermediate trusted entity like that could fit into an ACME situation. Which, if you look at the architecture, the domain owner is kind of acting in that way. So you might reach out to some folks that have kind of that use case and fold that in. And I think that would become a little bit more compelling than as opposed to just focusing this on the short-term auto-renewed case.
Well, just as a note, it's similar, but it's much more restrictive than the general array. Yes,
it could be, but I think there's some overlap.
Hi, Sean Turner. So this kind of reminds me of like one of the solutions for Lurk, right? So that's what it's kind of aimed at, essentially, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. This comes with the idea that instead of hosting the private key somewhere or having something that's as an oracle, it's something that you can simply generate the certificates.
Fair enough. Okay. I mean, I did like the stuff that we talked about earlier in the previous meeting. Of course, now I'm completely that's like dispatch where you do ACME on both sides, because if you're going to do it on one, you do it on the other, code reuse, all good. Yay. So
yes, it's connected, and in fact, one of the implementations, the implementation we have is located in a repository that is called Lurk.
Hi, John Peterson. So looking at this slide, I was just thinking how similar it is to a slide that I'm going to have talking about authority tokens, which have a very similar problem in the sense of you need to kind of like go off to someone to make a request from an authority. And we were just actually talking about, we need to hack in some protocol that's going to explain what the request is that we're making of this authority that we're going to turn around and give to the ACME server afterwards. And it made me wonder if like this isn't maybe a coextensive problem even in terms of what exactly it is that we're trying to get from this. So, I mean, again, I'm going to present this in a minute, so we can talk about it there or then. But I will say that our philosophy of this, just in the informal discussions we've had, has been the guys in Addis have done some work on this, on just a RESTful interface for making this request. We were going to put that in and not say that it's like mandatory to use, but to say, here's a way to do it. And I don't know if you need something that's like mandatory to use for this, or if you think there could be different things for different lurkish use cases that I know you're concerned about. But
No, but basically the concern is about someone that owns an identity and wants to bind it to a private key that they don't have.
Yeah.
In the moment, it's basically that, which is the archetypal use case is again it's a CDN node that without you don't want to deliver your private key, and then what you get is a temporary thing that can be
I remember
the
that,
delegated.
yes.
It's basically that. Whether, I mean, maybe thinking what Richard was saying, that maybe that we're talking about something that is a much more general environment, we could think about making them converge. I don't know what, I would like my co-authors to say, have their say, because maybe I was saying, to me it looks a way to explore.
Oh, and we're looking at it from 1,000 feet now, right? We don't have to actually have a discussion about this and figure it out. I'm just saying a lot of what we came to as we started poking around the stuff that we're doing with STIR is the need for this kind of more generic mechanism for it, right? And I could see there being a set of kind of adjacent tools to ACME that provide properties just like this that are probably as generic as what we're doing on the authority token. But please, other people weigh in on this.
Yaron Schiffer, well, a co-author, obviously. I'm a little bit wary of the direction we're taking or seem to be taking here. For delegation, we need two pieces. One is the piece that's hopefully going into working group last call here, which is an ACME extension. And I think we have like general consensus how this can be done. There's also this other piece of the request where the client requests delegation from the forwarder, for lack of a better name. Today we have a very simple, very small solution for the request piece. It could be termed as a subset of ACME, and it could be generalized into something more like a registration, whatever it's called, array. Authority, right? But we have not heard an actual requirement for an RA in ACME. So we're taking a very small solution that's actually needed by an actual use case, and like growing it into something that will take a long time and that we're not actually sure is needed for a real use case.
Right. I mean, procedurally, you're just kind of out of order here. I mean, basically, the way in which you have a number of options for bringing work here, and those options are, like if you want to do something that is like the thing your proposal, your avenue for that is sec dispatch, or asking for a BOF. And if you want to do something, and so like I think you kind of didn't get like a really super positive response there. So like you don't like have a lot of runway there, and so now you have another avenue, which is this technical, which is the angle bringing it to ACME and having it be more ACME-like. If you don't want to do that, we could have a conversation about what your options are for your original proposal. But like I said, I tell you, when we typically the purpose of exec dispatch is to evaluate those proposals.
All right.
Just to be clear, that's me speaking as AD.
There's a reflection. I mean, I don't believe that this deserves a BOF or a separate group.
So,
I mean, we're talking about a single document, as Yaron said, is something that is extremely simple. So.
Yeah, so I don't hear anyone saying this is a bad idea to make this thing fit in the ACME framework. The most negative thing was, well, we don't have a document yet to really look at. So bring it up on the lists. We have at least some people in the group who are interested in doing this, obviously. They've gone and come back and gone and come back. So, let's give them another bite. Let's do it. Any objections, concerns? Okay. Go off and write and do a -00 and
And what do? Shall we continue with the standalone protocol, or shall we explore the ACME profiling?
so I think what Eckert was saying is if it's going to be an ACME, then it should be ACME-like.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, the document I'm looking for is an informative document that says, here's how you use ACME on two sides of a box to create
Yeah.
this function.
Fine.
Right.
Fine.
Okay. Thank you.
Composing individual 00, correct? Yes.
Yes. Okay, thanks. Okay, sorry, that one. So one of the things. Before we get to that, it's only Monday and already. It's only Tuesday, and I've already forgotten all the names. Is the guy who presented at the Hot RFC here? Oh, there you are. Yes, of course.
Do you have HTML?
Do we have HDMI? Yes, we do. Oh, there you go. All right. Wow.
So, welcome everybody. This is about the impact of IP use after free attacks on domain validated certificates. And the problem basically is if an attacker can reuse an IP address for which a stale DNS record exists, so DNS record pointing to an IP address, the attacker can actually get a valid certificate via domain validation. And in fact, this is a serious problem. So we did a measurement study and we found 700,000 domains which were actually stale, pointing to Amazon EC2 instances. Demonstrates that it's relatively easy to actually get an IP address that points to a specific domain which you want to take over something for. And the basic problem in ACME is that we're basically verifying an IP address, so a target, as a proxy in order to verify, in order to prove that you have authority over a domain. And basically, this is not only IP use after free, this is asterisk after free. So for example, Uber was hit when one of their load balancer instances that they had used with Amazon became stale. So they still had it in their rotation, but well, they forfeited it, and then an attacker was able to actually register it and thereby steal cookies for authoruber.com, which meant that they could basically steal accounts from Uber users. And this can also happen if you have BGP hijacks. Then you also get IP use after free, and in every other case where we're using something where we are pointing to verify ACME, to verify authority over a domain. This should have only been one slide. So what are we doing about this? So we do have the standard process of requesting a certificate, getting back a challenge, and hosting the challenge over HTTP. What we are suggesting is an additional step. So instead of directly sending back the challenge, you first check the CT logs, see if there has been ever a certificate issued for the domain for which you see a certificate request. And if there ever has been a certificate issued for that domain, you actually ask the requester to host the challenge via HTTPS. There's a little bit of argument proxy here because there's some considerations we'll go into like later. But technically, this should prove that authority over the domain was continuous, so that the person now requesting a certificate is the same person or a person authorized by the party who requested a previous certificate to actually request a new certificate. This, of course, comes with several CVETs. So, for example, what do we do if things fail? What do we do if the certificate has expired? There was some discussion about proving possession of original keys. That was in version 00 of the ACME draft in section 7.3. There's other questions, what we can do if things fail. So we could, for example, say, okay, let's gracefully do a DNS challenge, because then you cannot only take over a single IP address, you actually have to take over the whole domain. And if you're then further again, also requiring DNSSEC, you're also preventing, for example, BGP MITM attacks. There's a lot of corner cases we would have to investigate. So what happens if you lose a keys, if there's some disaster happening to your server, no backups, or if your deployment process is actually broken and you're just randomly losing keys, hoping to be able to reissue again and again and again. And there's also problems with using HTTPS. So HTTPS is explicitly not allowed in the ACME HTTP challenge. I think it was already mentioned earlier. This is because of the SNI problem, which means that you might be displaying a default vhost that then can be used to actually also impersonate the client, which is somewhat similar to the problem we're trying to address here. Technically, for the case we're dealing with, this is not a problem, because we're assuming that there already is a certificate. So in the default vhost case, certificate validation would not be successful because the common name does not match. Another option would be to actually building a dedicated challenge in which the previous SSL keys are used to sign a challenge. This also has some CVETs, and it's basically a trade-off between these two, which would have to be discussed, because the second one is also like doing your own things with crypto. Reusing HTTPS would mean that we would be reusing something which actually has been tested and proven by others. And if we would be using HTTPS keys to sign a challenge, we would be using keys for things they were not originally meant to be used for. So from our perspective, there are several next steps. So we should first figure out the different corner cases, and should figure out how many certificate issuances are actually affected by this. We plan to write a draft document for this in the next couple of weeks, which is hopefully available for discussion in Bangkok. And we want to write some PRs to the ACME client server implementations to actually enable this. So with that, I'm open for discussion.
It's Richard Burns. So first of all, thanks for this. I think this is really, it's interesting work that you've found that there is this issue, and I think this is a real risk to the PKI ecosystem that applies even more broadly than ACME. And it's great that you guys have looked into what the mitigations could be. That said, I think that this picture, while it sort of hangs together in principle, is going to be challenging to realize. In terms of how you operationalize looking at CT logs in real time, and how often you do this. I think we considered this proof of possession of prior certificates, prior keys earlier in the process, and so it'll be. But I think you've identified in here some solutions to the problems we had then. For instance, using the DNS challenge to fall back when you can't, when you run into these brittleness problems where you've lost the prior keys. So I'm looking forward to a draft. I think this is something where there's probably some useful stuff to be done. I'd be interested to hear from some of the CAs in the room. I'm looking at like Tim and CPU. Like, is this something you guys find concerning, and where you might be interested in trying to do better?
So, okay. Eric Pascola, I guess. Richard, I mean, the piece in that red box there, doesn't actually need to be like standardized at all, right? I think that basically, I mean, I think that this working group has to standardize, if anything, is this is how you establish that the prior available, the prior available certificate actually corresponds to the new request. And the stuff in the red box is just like, there's some oracle that tells you it's a pre-existing cert.
All right, Tim Halbeek, did you cert? IP certificates are hard. I wish I had a better answer to that. We've actually discussed it a couple times in the last 4 months on the validation working group, and the specific question of the fact that it is impossible to determine. Oh, excuse me. Sorry.
This is about domain name certs where the target of the A record has changed from the domain owner to someone else.
That one's hard too. There are lots of things that aren't hard. So that one actually was one of Ryan Sleevy's favorite things to worry about before it became one of the things that he decided he no longer was worried about. A couple of years ago in Switzerland, he wanted CAs to check every month whether the domain validation was still valid. I mean, that's part of the problem with certificates is you're certifying what's true at the time of issuance, and it may cease to be true in the future. And I don't know, other than revocation, how you deal with that.
Yeah. So I'll point out that the likely path forward here is a draft that talks about, it would be the ACME equivalent of DNS ops, right? As in, here's some advice as to what you might do to make sure that the things you've issued via ACME are still good. Yeah, okay.
So
Richard?
what I would expect to see in this draft is some protocol mechanism for proving possession of a prior key, probably either resurrecting some of the syntax we had before or just doing something over HTTPS, together with some operational considerations about when you would use that mechanism and how it would fit in with some other stuff. This isn't actually just, so that's what I expect to see in the draft. Just to clarify the scope here, this isn't actually about continuity of validation. This is where the thing you are validating, would have been true at some point in the past, but is not true by the time you go to validate. So, you set up an A record to example.com when you were using that server on AWS. You then left that A record there, canceled your AWS account, and AWS recycled the IP address and reassigned it to those guys. And so then so those guys can now go to you and get certificate, or can go to the CA and get certificates for example.com, even though they don't own example.com.
Yeah, so that's another one that. Is that hard? No, well, we actually solved it, so it was easy. But then people decided they didn't want to do this. This is related to the question of whether you can do validation successfully with stale information that's sitting around from previous validations. The entire point of the improvements to the validation methods that we made involving a challenge response was supposed to prevent that threat. It does not work with certain things that people want to do around delegated validation, where they just want to point over to a lot of automated renewal systems want the property that they rely on something that's sitting in DNS, and as long as it's still sitting in DNS, the renewal still works, especially when you get into validation for short-lived certificates where you don't want to be doing a challenge response with a token that you get from the CA every 5 days. So there's been a move away from freshness checks. I think that if we move away from freshness checks, then we do have all the problems that you mentioned. And so we probably have to think of what are other mitigating factors if we're going to allow that sort of very automated renewal. I'm
going to cut the line, ask the remaining speakers to be brief because one, it's likely that we'll see some document before the next IETF, and two, the TN auth and auth list folks who would already have documents in the working group are running out of time.
All right, so this is Corey from TrustWave. So I'm looking at the workflow here, and I'm wondering if we could maybe simplify it a bit. Since most web PKI certificates now have embedded SCTs, I'm wondering that you could basically remove that step to check for existing certificates, do the host challenge, retrieve the certificate, and then look up in the certificate transparency log using the embedded one of the embedded SCTs to go and see if that exists. You get the certificate and make sure it matches. I'm wondering if that would.
Let's design the thing later. I'm just
Okay.
conscious that I've let the whole agenda run long. So, well,
This is Daniel McCarney from
Daniel.
Let's Encrypt. So I'm kind of on board with everyone else here that says that we need a draft to really evaluate this. I'm a little bit skeptical about it. I think the operational difficulties that are not addressed just in the slides so far, especially around checking the CT logs and which logs and maintaining the full logs are pretty substantial, especially at the scale we're operating at. And I did want to mention, in relation to the PRs you're planning, please try to submit those to Pebble and not Boulder. That's kind of our smaller experimental ACME server as a small note. And earlier when you were mentioning the fallback to DNS-01 challenge type, from a practical perspective, the deployments that we've seen of ACME clients, particularly with large scale integrations at hosting providers, they almost always select one challenge type and their client is configured only to address that challenge type. So the idea that if you are an integrator or even an individual user that's running CertBot or another ACME client, expecting to solve an HTTP-01 challenge and the server gives you back just a DNS-01 challenge, I would say almost universally that client is not going to be set up to provision the DNS records in the zone, not expecting it. So we could get to a world where maybe the clients would support multiple authentication methods and the user would have to configure all of the authentication methods that may be possible, which will be challenging, especially based on the DNS zone requirements and the update API. But presently, you've got one challenge type that you're expecting to use. If the server doesn't give you back that and expects some other challenge type, you're just going to stop issuance and post in our community forum, basically.
Thank you. We'll consider it.
thank you very much for the discussion. Look forward to seeing. Is you up or Chris? I thought
We only
Chris
have like
was-
6 minutes left in the working group. So we're going to do this incredibly quickly. We're going to do this like Ecker speed is what I'm
Whoa.
aiming for. Well, I'm doing this Ecker like circa 2005 speed. That's what we're aiming for. Next slide, please. So for those not versed in this work, this is our attempt to leverage ACME to provide certificates that will be helpful in defeating robocalling, that annoying crap that's been going around forever. But as we looked at this problem, what we quickly discovered was that we needed a more generic mechanism, really, to be able to go out and to ask an authority who knows things about telephone numbers and about similar resources that exist outside of the internet, basically, to give us some kind of token that a client could then present in response to a challenge to an ACME server in order to get a CA issued for the proper resource. And as we're kind of studying that and looking at the edges of it, we realized this was applicable actually to a whole lot of different things. And so we have this document here, the ACME Authority Token, which kind of genericizes this mechanism. Chris went in a second is going to talk about the specific application of this to the problem we have for issuing certs for telephone numbers and for similar resources. Next slide. So this is what we're talking about. Basically, we are creating a challenge type for TK auth. And we have a subtype mechanism for it right now called ATC. This is based on the notion we might actually want to have multiple subtypes for this. And although we've gone back and forth about this, I still think there's some utility potentially in doing that. I don't know if we really have time to delve too much into that issue today. The basic idea, though, is that the token you're going to get from an authority is a job. And that you're then going to present this job, which is going to have some stuff in it that's going to make it clear kind of what the ACME account is and what the resources you're asking for. That'll go back to the ACME server in response to the challenge, and presto, you get your cert for the resource. Next slide, please. And so, yeah, this you can see how we would just kind of jam in the ACME response there down the payload, this thing we're calling ATC. And in the ATC, that's just the base64 encoding of the job that gets jammed into there. Otherwise, this looks suspiciously like ordinary operations of ACME, does it not? Next slide. So I will try to at least say things about a couple open issues. People could dash to a microphone and speak to this if they were so inclined. Previously, we had a discussion about whether or not we should use the fingerprint or the nonce to kind of bind the token that was being generated by this authority to the ACME challenge. Should it be bound really to the challenge or to the ACME account? And that's really the distinction here between the fingerprint versus nonce. And what we decided to do is to say that for the use case we're most interested in, we think fingerprint works best. The reasons, some of which are actually related to like STAR, that we want to be able to get short-term certs, and so we want to be able to issue one of these tokens, potentially reuse it to get multiple certs from it without having to kind of go back and constantly be pinging the authority and things like that. So what we've done now is we've just created a generic binding that can be either fingerprint or nonce or specific, maybe other things people think of someday that might be different for different use cases. But if anybody has any further thoughts about this, this is the main switch we made from last time, is that we switched this over from nonce to fingerprint as kind of the default assumption we're making. But we want to leave it open in case there are use cases where nonce makes more sense, where it actually makes more sense to say, for this kind of authority, yeah, you want to actually be bound to that particular challenge that was issued, by the ACME server. I know that we have no time, so I don't want to get too much into this. We also, as I just mentioned earlier, we have this notion there should be a way to go to a token authority and to say, hey, I need one of these JOTs. And that requires a protocol. And as we thought about that, we're like, well, we should probably mock something up. Right now, we just have TBDs in the document about it. Our thinking up until now anyway had been, we'll just use a REST API. Some of the people who are applying this to the telephone problem have already spec'd one in another SDO and Addis. And we can just basically scarf all that material and put it in here. But if there is a need to create something more generic that might help the star case that you were discussing, I'd certainly be open to that. And I guess what we could do is just kind of mock up what we think this looks like based on the current stuff going on in Addis. And we could kind of compare that to what you're doing with star and see if it looks like there's an overlap or if it makes sense to try to converge around this. I think that's it. If anybody has any comments with the remaining 2 seconds. Chris is up. It's now 6:19.
So yeah, I'll keep this short and sweet. You can go to the next slide. Basically, there's two main changes in here, and this was straight out of agreement out of the last meeting. The first thing is, rather than have a JSON representation of the bits in the TNAuth list, we decided just to put the ASN1 base 64 encoded object into the token and the challenge. The other thing, as John mentioned, is the explicit support of fingerprint, basically the account-based fingerprint. Next slide. So really, I think we can go through these pretty quickly. I included them just in case we needed to talk about them, but in this one, let's see. Oh yeah, this is the type and the value for the new order. In the identifiers object, I changed the value to a base 60 and 64 encoded value. Next slide. Same thing with challenge and response. You have the value there that was changed. Next slide. And then the ATC, this is the fingerprint part in the ATC claim. I have an example in the document where it shows the fingerprint, and I defined it as, I think typically is done, the algorithm and then the hex values with colons. And that's it. Anybody have any questions, comments? I think we're getting pretty close here. I haven't heard any groans from anybody, at least in the community that we're the TN community.
Yeah, can I have a show of hands? How many people have read, do it the simple way, either or both of the documents? Okay. So yeah, skimmed it. Okay. So right, this is like secure identifiers for mobile telephones. This could, no, anyone's got a mobile phone wants to know who the other side of the party is, right? This is important and useful. So I, again, encourage people, and the user community of mobile phones is going to obviously swamp the user community of websites.
Before we move on, and pardon me if I'm very naive, but maybe it's because of the influence of the previous working group, but this has not some acknowledges some of the auth flows, or I'm completely wrong.
Well, I mean, OAuth uses JWT, so maybe there's some. Can use JWT.
It's a job then.
So,
yeah. So it's not.
No,
like,
I mean,
all right, I think that's
not only that. I mean, the flows and the way you go through authority, and then you request. It's about the endpoints, not only the formats. Well, probably with a different goal, and this is important because in one case we're talking about accessing general information. In this case, it's something that is much more sensitive, and this is probably should be, or we should be much more careful here. That maybe the guys in OAuth, anyone from OAuth here,
I think
but
it's more about the challenge and the definition because we want to use ACME with a third-party authority. I mean, all of these things are a mix of one thing or the other. But
yeah,
I guess,
no,
This isn't like it's certainly not an identity play, right? In a sense, these resources are not like human resources that you'd use for like SSO or something like that, right? These are like industrial things controlled by like government bodies that are issued for corporations for a purpose. It's very different from like I need to be able to log in or whatever to multiple places. So I mean, I don't think off the top of my head I see a great deal that's analogous, but maybe there's more to discuss about that.
Well,
probably not here though, because we're already like 3 minutes over this.
Well, and we also need to signal to the CA which type of certificate to create and what OID to put in and all that other stuff according to 8226.
Yeah, I mean, we looked at that actually originally. Could we make it OAuth? And it just didn't quite seem to fit right. It looks like it, but it's not. So.
All right, so we are over time. I promise next time we'll ask for 90 minutes because we got a lot of new and exciting stuff coming up. Thank you all. Make sure you've signed the blue sheets. If you haven't, then whoever's got them, bring them up front. Enjoy the social. Yeah, all of the slides will show up if you go to the meeting. Yeah.
That you dealt one.
Oh, no, that one wasn't. I'll get that uploaded. Yes.
Okay, you will do that.
Yeah. Mail me your slides so I can add them to the meeting materials. Yeah.
Yeah,